The mule kicked up a cloud of dust as it trotted over the rocky trail, its rattling saddlebag the only sound besides the wind. 13-year-old Rose Langley sat in the back of the wagon, her knees pulled up to her chest, arms wrapped tight around them. Her father hadn't said a word in over an hour, not since the last town, not since he sold her mother's necklace for a bottle of rye. The sun hung low over the Wyoming horizon, bleeding orange into the prairie. A storm gathered beyond the hills. Rose could feel it in her chest, the way the air grew heavier, like the land was holding its breath. "You hear me?" Thomas Langley barked suddenly, breaking the silence like a shotgun blast. Rose blinked. "Yes, sir." "Then get out." "What?" Thomas reined in the mule and turned to her, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. "I said, get out." He climbed down without waiting for a reply. Rose's heart thudded painfully as she followed him, stumbling onto the dry, cracked earth. Her boots sank into the dust. The air smelled of pine, old leather, and whiskey. Thomas walked around to the back of the wagon and tossed a small cloth sack at her feet. "You're no use to me," he growled. "A mouth that don't earn, a weight I don't need." He yanked a worn hunting rifle from the wagon bed and looked down at her. "Best learn to survive, or don't. Makes no difference to me." She couldn't breathe. Her lips trembled, but she refused to let the tears fall. "Pa!" He spat into the dirt, climbed back into the wagon, and slapped the reins. The mule lurched forward, wheels creaking against the rocky trail. Dust swallowed him in seconds, the wagon shrinking until it was just a silhouette, and then nothing. Gone. Rose stood motionless, her body frozen between rage and disbelief. Her throat burned, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Her fingers clenched around the cloth sack. Inside, only a flint striker, a broken hairbrush, and a crumpled tin photo of her mother. A gust of wind tore across the land, lifting her copper-colored hair and sending shivers down her spine. She looked around. Tall grass stretched forever, a sea of gold and green with no sign of shelter, no sign of life. A storm rolled over the mountains to the west. Thunder growled like an angry beast. She wrapped her arms around herself, wishing she'd thought to steal her father's coat. Rose took one shaky step, then another. She walked toward a thin line of trees in the distance. Cottonwoods, maybe. Maybe water. Maybe something. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stand still. By dusk, her legs ached. Her lips were dry. She'd found the trees, just barely a creek running beside them. She dropped to her knees and drank greedily, the water so cold it numbed her tongue. Her reflection looked back at her. Dirt-streaked cheeks, wild hair, eyes too old for 13. Lightning flashed overhead, followed by a crash that shook the sky. Rain started, not gently, but in sheets. She stumbled under the biggest cottonwood, dragging fallen branches together in a crude pile. It wouldn't be enough. The wind cut through her dress like a knife. Her bones felt hollow, her skin cold and raw. She clutched the flint striker and struck again and again, sparks flying uselessly into damp leaves. "Please," she whispered, tears finally falling. "Just once, please." A faint glow, a flicker, then nothing. She screamed and threw the striker. It clattered into the roots of the tree, vanishing beneath mud and leaves. The rain kept falling. The storm roared. She curled up under the roots, shivering uncontrollably. "I won't die," she whispered. "Not here. Not for him." But the prairie didn't care. Somewhere beyond the trees something moved. Not the wind, not the rain. Footsteps. Rose's breath hitched. Her fingers gripped the little tin photo in her pocket like a talisman. Maybe it was her father. Come back. Maybe he'd change his mind. Maybe. A shadow shifted between the trees. Rose didn't dare move. Her heart thundered in her chest. And then she saw him. Tall, silent, wrapped in a buckskin cloak. His hair dark as the night, braided down his back. Eyes like storm clouds. He didn't speak, didn't move closer, just watched her. Rose sat up slowly, soaked and trembling. "Please," she whispered. I won't hurt you." Still, he said nothing, but something in his eyes changed. Not pity, not fear, just awareness. She blinked, and he was gone. She scrambled out of her shelter, rain still soaking her to the bone. "Wait!" she called into the dark. "Please don't leave me." But the prairie had gone quiet again. The storm passed, and she was alone. Or so she thought. When morning came, she found a bundle near her shelter, wrapped in deerskin, tied with thin sinew. Inside, a strip of dried meat, a bundle of dry moss, and her flint striker. Someone had returned. Someone was watching. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Rose hadn't slept much. Even after the storm passed and the prairie stilled, she kept jerking awake at every rustle, every crack of a branch. The bundle, the meat, the moss, the returned flint, rested beside her like a question with no answer. Someone had seen her. Someone had helped. But why? Who? The morning sun climbed over the horizon in pale streaks of gold, and the prairie glistened with last night's rain. Her dress, still damp, clung to her skin, and her bare arms prickled in the breeze. She sat cross-legged in the hollow under the cottonwood, chewing the dried meat slowly. It was tough, smoky, unlike anything she'd tasted before, but it filled the hollow in her belly. She ran her thumb over the worn edge of her mother's tin photo. "You always said people can surprise you," she whispered. "Let's hope that's still true." A noise, soft, deliberate. She froze, then rose to her feet, scanning the trees. He stood there again, the man from last night. Only this time, he didn't vanish. He stepped forward, slow and steady, until he stood just beyond the edge of the grove. Now in the daylight, she could see him clearer. Skin bronzed by sun and wind, hair tied in a single braid, leather leggings and a shirt that looked handmade, knife at his side. His face was unreadable, stoic, but not cruel. Rose swallowed hard. "Are you the one who brought this?" He said nothing. She nodded toward the bundle. "Thank you." Still nothing. She took a shaky breath. "Do you speak English?" A pause, then quietly, "Enough." His voice was rough, deep, like distant thunder. It didn't match the silence he carried around himself like a cloak. Rose stepped forward, hugging herself. "My name's Rose. Rose Langley. My father left me out here." He tilted his head but said nothing. "I'm 13, she added, like it might matter. "I won't be trouble, I don't know where to go." The man watched her with the stillness of a deer in the tall grass. Then finally he asked, "You are sick?" She shook her head. "Hurt?" "No." He stepped closer, one cautious pace. "Hungry?" Rose hesitated, then nodded. The man turned without a word and began walking away, slow enough for her to follow if she chose. She hesitated only a second, then picked up the little bundle, tucked it into her shawl, and followed him. They walked for what felt like hours. The man said nothing, only moved with the sure-footed silence of someone who belonged to this land. His path wove between dry creek beds and thickets of sagebrush, avoiding open ground, always with purpose. Rose had to jog now and then to keep up. Finally, they reached a rocky bluff overlooking a narrow canyon. Nestled beneath the overhang was a small camp, a lean-to of pine branches, a fire circle lined with stones. A woven blanket stretched tight between two boulders. The man pointed to a flat rock. "Sit." She obeyed. He crouched near the fire ring, gathered moss and twigs, and struck a flint. Quick, efficient. Within seconds, a flame flickered to life. The scent of smoke curled into the morning air. From a pouch at his waist, he pulled another strip of meat, a handful of dried berries, and offered them without a word. "Thank you," she whispered again, more genuine this time. They ate in silence. Rose studied him carefully, stealing glances. His hands were scarred but steady. His eyes, when they met hers, held none of the cruelty her father's did, just caution. Finally, she dared ask, "What's your name?" A pause, then, "Tivoni." "Is that Comanche?" "No." "Apache?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I am many things." Rose didn't press. She knew better than to poke at stories people didn't offer freely. Instead, she said, "You saved me." "You didn't have to." "No," he agreed. "I did not." "Why did you?" Another pause. "Because the land does not lie." She frowned, confused. "I saw what he did," Tivoni added. Saw his tracks, saw yours. He glanced toward the distant prairie. He left you to die. The words hit like a slap. Even if she already knew the truth, hearing someone else say it made it real in a way it hadn't been before. She blinked fast. He's done it before, she whispered. Not like this, but he used to leave me behind in town for days, with nothing. My ma died 2 years back. After that, I was just something to drag. Tavoni nodded once. Then you are free now. Free. The word felt like a weight and a gift all at once. As afternoon stretched across the canyon, Tavoni showed her how to dry her dress near the fire without scorching it. He offered a spare hide shirt, far too big, but warmer than the thin cotton she wore. He handed her a carved stick with notches on it. For what? She asked. Stories, he said. Each day, one mark, so you do not forget how far you've come. She stared at the stick, then made her first mark. That night, as they huddled near the fire, Rose asked the question that had haunted her all day. What happens now? Tavoni looked into the flames. Tomorrow we move. Too open here. Where? He didn't answer at first. Then finally, there is a place. North, my people. If you want to come. Rose didn't hesitate. I do. Tavoni nodded once, and the fire crackled between them. Two strangers under a prairie sky, one fleeing the past, the other bound to the land that remembered every kindness and cruelty alike. The prairie had its own kind of silence. It wasn't empty. It was layered. The wind spoke first, brushing the tall grasses in long, sighing waves. Then came the soft patter of Rose's borrowed moccasins on the cracked earth, the hush of her breath, and the faint whisper of Tavoni's movement ahead. They'd been walking since sunrise, leaving the little canyon behind. Rose didn't ask where they were headed. She trusted Tavoni now. Not blindly. She'd learned that lesson already, but because of how he moved in the world, measured, alert, and without cruelty. That was enough for her. As they crossed a narrow ridge, Tavoni paused. Smoke. Rose smelled it too. Wood smoke, thick and acrid, carried on the breeze. Tavoni dropped to a crouch, motioning her down. They belly-crawled the last few feet to the edge of a slope. Below, nestled in a low basin near the cottonwoods, was a cabin, or what remained of it. The roof had collapsed inward, one wall blackened and smoldering. No movement, no voices. Tavoni's jaw tightened. This was not an accident, he muttered. Rose's heart sank. You think? Riders, he said grimly. Settler men, maybe soldiers. 5, maybe 6, came before us. Are they still nearby? Tavoni scanned the horizon. Number gone west. Rose stared at the burned-out shell of the homestead. Someone lived there? He nodded. Rose whispered, Do you know who? An old friend, Tavoni said. He kept to himself. Had a wife once. Lost her in a fever. They moved cautiously down into the basin, stepping over scorched timber and broken clay pots. The ground still radiated heat. Tavoni found tracks. Heavy boot prints, horseshoes. He followed them briefly before returning. Your father was here, he said simply. Rose went cold. How do you know? Same boot pattern I saw by the creek. Worn heel, narrow step. Jackson Morgan is hunting. Her throat tightened. He's not alone. Number and he's getting desperate. Tavoni crouched near the ashes, scooping a pinch of dirt. He burns what he cannot use. They didn't stay long. By dusk, they made camp under a craggy outcropping shaped like a sleeping bear. Tavoni started a small fire, shielded from sight by piled stones and brush. Rose helped gather wood, careful to only pick dry branches, just as he'd taught her. They ate in silence. Then Rose asked, Why would he burn that house? Tavoni looked up from the fire. To send a message. To who? To me, he said. And now, to you. The wind shifted and the fire snapped. Rose stared into the flames. He doesn't want me back. Not really. He just doesn't want anyone else to have me. Tavoni didn't argue. She turned to him. If he finds us, he won't, Tavoni interrupted, calm but firm. Not before we reach the camp. But what if he does? Tavoni reached into his pouch and pulled out a small carved stone. He placed it in her palm. What is it? A marker, he said. If we're separated, follow the river north. Leave this near the Big Bend with 3 stones around it. I'll find you." Rose closed her fingers around the stone. It was warm from his hand. "I won't lose you," she whispered. The corners of Tavoni's mouth lifted. "Barely." "We ride at first light," he said. That night, Rose didn't dream of her father. She dreamed of fire, of the burned homestead and the man who once lived there. She dreamed of smoke curling through an open sky. And she dreamed of a girl, not herself, running across the prairie, barefoot and wild, chasing something just out of reach. When she woke, Tavoni was already saddling the horse. Time to ride. The land turned harsher by the hour. Gone were the soft grasses and winding creeks. In their place stretched a parched wasteland of red clay, scattered rocks, and sagebrush scorched by a sun and wind. The horse's hooves kicked up plumes of dust that hung in the air like old ghosts. Rose pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders. The sun hadn't yet broken through the clouds, but she could feel the heat crawling beneath her skin, creeping in quiet like a sickness. Tavoni rode ahead, his silhouette sharp against the ochre skyline. He hadn't spoken much since they left the burned cabin, and Rose didn't press him. Grief settled differently in everyone. His had the shape of silence. As they crested a ridge, Tavoni raised his hand and halted. Rose followed his gaze. Below, the land dipped into a shallow gulch. At the bottom was something unexpected, a riderless horse limping in slow circles, reins dragging in the dust. Nearby, a splash of color, blue cloth, like the sleeve of a settler's coat. Tavoni dismounted without a word. They approached carefully, boots crunching over cracked stone. The man on the ground was unconscious, barely breathing. Blood stained his shirt, his right arm bent at an unnatural angle, shoulder pierced clean through by a bullet. Tavoni knelt beside him and rolled up the sleeve. "A rider from Willow Creek," he muttered. "They send scouts ahead now." Rose crouched beside them. The man was young, maybe 17, with pale lashes and trembling hands. Not much older than she was. A boy playing a man's game. "He's dying," she said quietly. Tavoni nodded. "And if he lives, he'll tell your father we're close." Rose stared at the wound, at the broken body crumpled in the dust. Her hands clenched into fists. "No," she said. "If he lives, he'll tell the truth." Tavoni raised an eyebrow. "You would gamble lives on a promise from a boy with blood on his hands?" "I'd rather gamble than become like my father." A silence passed between them. Then Tavoni stood and offered her a short nod. Respect, not agreement. "I'll bind his arm. If he runs, it won't be fast." They left the boy beneath the shelter of a rocky overhang with a canteen, a strip of dried meat, and a choice. Live or don't. Speak truth or lie. The rest was on him. By midday, the landscape shifted again. Mesas loomed in the distance, tall, jagged like old teeth, and the air grew thick with the scent of juniper and dust. Somewhere ahead, beyond those stone towers, lay the winter camp. Rose could feel it. It wasn't just the promise of safety. It was something more, like a tether pulling at her ribs. The memory of a place she hadn't seen, but somehow always knew existed. Where names weren't written in birth ledgers or on marriage certificates, but in stories, in deeds, in dust and wind and bone. By nightfall, they reached the canyon. It was narrow, almost invisible unless you were looking. Tavoni dismounted and moved a hand over a stone slab, twice clockwise, once counter. The slab shifted slightly with a scrape of rock on rock. "Hidden trail," he said. They walked the horses in single file, the canyon walls towering high on both sides. Stars blinked overhead, distant and cold. Rose held her breath as they walked, afraid to disturb the silence. Then at last the world opened. Below them lay a valley of firelight and movement. Dozens of hide lodges, smoke curling from chimneys, children's laughter, the scent of stew and cedar. It hit her all at once. Belonging. And it nearly broke her. She didn't realize she was crying until Tavoni placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're home now," he said. "No," Rose whispered. "I'm choosing home now." They descended into the valley together. The council fire burned low when Rose and Tavoni entered. Eyes turned, dozens of them. Faces from a dozen nations, Kiowa, Comanche, Apache, Even a few pale settlers who had found peace here. Not power. This was no mob, no crowd seeking vengeance. This was a gathering of the free, weighing one question. Would they shelter the daughter of their enemy? Tavoni spoke first, his voice steady. She is not her father. No one moved. Rose stepped forward, heart pounding. My name is Rose Morgan, and I know what that name means. But I didn't choose it. I didn't choose what he did. I only choose what I'll do now. Stillness. Then a woman rose, gray hair braided in silver cords, her face weathered like riverstone. What would you do then? She asked. With the name you didn't choose? Rose's voice didn't shake. Bury it. Silence stretched long and taut. Then a nod. Not from everyone, but enough. The old woman lifted her chin. Then tomorrow we bury that name and begin a new one. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Rose stood outside the lodge Tavoni had helped raise for her. The stars above blinked in familiar patterns, but nothing else felt the same. She was no longer waiting to be hunted. She was being born again, a quiet shuffle behind her. I knew you wouldn't sleep, Tavoni said. Neither did you. He stepped beside her, arms crossed. The boy from the ridge. He lived. Good, Rose meant it. He reached Willow Creek, told them what your father did. She looked over slowly. And? They didn't believe him. Not all the way, but enough to whisper. Rose nodded. It begins. Tavoni hesitated, then added, Your father's coming. She didn't flinch. He rides with 5 men. One's a soldier, the tracker from Fort Land. I figured. She looked back at the stars. He won't stop unless I face him. End it. Tavoni's eyes held hers. Then we end it. At dawn, she stood at the edge of the valley in her new garb, a dress of simple hide and beads, her copper hair braided tight with river stones. Behind her, warriors waited. Beside her, Tavoni stood like a shadow made flesh, and in the distance a figure approached on horseback. Alone, Jackson Morgan. He dismounted slowly, swagger gone. Sweat stained his shirt despite the cold. The man who once towered over her now looked smaller somehow, swallowed by the horizon. Well, he spat, aren't you pretty in your savage costume? No reaction. You done playing Red Girl, Rose? You coming home or do I drag you? Still silence. Then, there is no home, Rose said. You burned it down the day you left me to die. His face twisted. That wasn't death, girl. That was a lesson. And I taught you real good. You're tougher now. You're welcome. Her voice dropped. You taught me something. You taught me what kind of man I'll never become. Jackson's hand twitched near his holster. So did Tavoni's. But Rose lifted a hand. Don't. She stepped forward alone. I'm not your property. I'm not your legacy. I'm the girl you left behind. And the woman you can't control. You little, but she was already turning her back, walking away. He didn't fire. He couldn't. Not because he didn't want to, but because she'd already beaten him. With words, with defiance, with survival. That night the council danced. Not for her, for what she'd chosen. A new name. Ashes marked her face. Riverstone at her throat. No longer Rose Morgan. Now she was Morning Fire, and no man could take that from her. They said the name Morning Fire like it had always belonged to her. Children whispered it as she passed. Warriors spoke it with respect. Elders nodded when they saw her, like they knew something she hadn't yet realized. But Rose, Morning Fire, knew this wasn't the end. It was the start of the storm. Jackson Morgan had ridden off alone, humiliated. But men like him didn't disappear. They regrouped. They sharpened knives in the dark. And she knew deep in her bones he would return, only next time, not to talk, to burn. So when Tavoni gathered the Winter Council 3 nights later, she was there. This time not as the girl they'd sheltered, but as one of their own. We can't wait for fire to come to our doorstep, she said, eyes sweeping the circle. We take the fight to its source. An elder spoke, cautious. What would you have us do, child? Raise war bands? Strike their fort? No, she said, but there's a trading post north of Willow Creek. Morgan goes there for allies, ammunition, reputation, We don't need to draw blood. We just need to draw light. Tavoni smiled, catching her plan. We expose him. Morning Fire nodded. We expose the truth and let his power die in shame, not in gunpowder. It took 3 weeks, 3 long weeks of movement between tribes. Messages sent, scouts returned, stories gathered, witnesses found, those he'd stolen from, those he'd lied to. Even an old preacher who'd once hidden Morgan's dealings in exchange for gold. And when the spring thaw began to spread over the Kansas plains, they rode to Willow Creek, not in hiding, but in daylight. Morning Fire wore no bonnet. She rode with braids and beads and boots caked in the dust of the old trails. Beside her, Tavoni, behind them, a line of riders from a dozen nations, and in their hands not rifles, but ledgers, letters, and names. The town froze as they arrived. People came from shops, saloons, porches. Then he appeared, Jackson Morgan, red-eyed with too much whiskey in his gut and too much pride in his voice. You think showing your painted face changes what you are, he barked. You're still mine. Morning Fire slid from her horse slowly, steadily. No, she said loud enough for every soul in Willow Creek to hear. I'm nobody's but my own. Then she held up the book, the ledger that bore his handwriting, his bribes, his betrayals, the list of names of people bought, sold, broken. I'm not here to hurt you, she said. I'm here to bury you with your own truth. The silence that followed broke him faster than bullets ever could. Jackson lunged, but found no fight waiting, only emptiness. Tavoni didn't need to stop him. The townsfolk did. The people he'd once ruled with fear now pulled him down with disgust. The sheriff stepped forward, hand on his revolver. That ledger real? Morning Fire nodded. Signed by a preacher, stamped by the army quartermaster. Morgan didn't speak, just sat in the dirt like a man who'd lost his shadow. That night, they didn't celebrate in Willow Creek. They left quietly without another word. Justice didn't always need noise. Sometimes it needed only truth. Weeks passed, and Morning Fire stayed, not in the shadows of the winter camp, but as part of its lifeblood. She hunted, she tanned hides, she taught numbers to children around the firelight. She laughed again, for real, for the first time in what felt like years. And Tavoni, he was always near, never pushing, never pulling, just there. Until one day beneath the blooming cottonwoods, he asked, would you ride beside me? Not just now, always. She didn't cry. She smiled, because that fire her father tried to smother, it never died. It became Morning Fire, and now it lit the way forward. And so, across these unforgiving lands, another tale drifts away with the wind. If this quiet courage, this stubborn heart touched you in any way, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass this story on to someone who needs it. Don't forget to subscribe, because out here there are still so many truths left to tell, each one carved from pain, hope, and dust. This is Wild West Stories. Thank you for watching.